You know, it's funny how a tiny dispute can just explode. What starts with a few plants and a drainage ditch can somehow turn into this massive year-long legal war. That's exactly what happened between one homeowner and his HOA, and the entire outcome, well, it all came down to a single word in a contract. All right, let's just imagine for a second. Your neighbor's yard is a total mess, and it looks like it could flood your home during the next big storm. You do the right thing. You report it to your HOA, and you get nothing. They don't do a thing. So who's on the hook legally? Is it you, your neighbor, the HOA? That exact question is the central puzzle of the story we're diving into. So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the flood fears that kicked this whole thing off. Then we'll follow the case as it heads to court. We'll look at that first judge's ruling, a surprising second chance, and then we'll really get into the nitty-gritty, the difference between a right and an obligation.
Okay, so our story kicks off in Cave Creek, Arizona. Our main character is a condo owner named John Sellers, and one day he's looking at this little stormwater channel behind his place, and he doesn't just see a ditch. Nope, he sees a full-blown disaster just waiting to happen.
All right, so here are the players. On one side, you've got John Sellers. On the other, his HOA, the Rancho Madera Condominium Association. And the battlefield? It's this tiny little 3-by-3-foot drainage ditch. Sellers was absolutely convinced that some overgrown plants, plus some chicken wire a neighbor put up, to keep their little dog from running off, was a ticking time bomb. He thought during the next big rain, it would all clog up and send water flooding right into his home.
Now, to really get what Sellers was arguing, you've got to know about something called CC&Rs. It's the rule book for the whole neighborhood. Think of it like the community's constitution. Everyone agrees to follow it. And Sellers was convinced his HOA was violating its own rules. And just like with a real constitution, the exact meaning of a single word can turn into a huge, huge fight.
So Sellers tried the normal route first. He sent letters to the HOA, but he felt like he was just being ignored, that they weren't taking him seriously. So he decided to escalate things. Big time. He filed a formal petition with the Arizona Office of Administrative Hearings and officially took his HOA to court.
And once the lawyers get involved, things can move surprisingly fast. He filed that petition in August and bam! By December, after a couple of hearings, the first judge was already handing down a ruling. We're talking only 4 months from start to finish. So in court, it was a classic showdown. On one side, Sellers came armed with photos and videos of rain, trying to prove that this stuff in the ditch was a major flood risk. But then the HOS president, a guy named Jeffrey Kaplan, he gets up and says, hold on a minute, that ditch has never flooded. He even pointed out that it held up just fine during a massive 100-year storm a few years back. The HOS's position was, hey, we sent out letters. We told people it's their job to keep it clear. Okay, so the judge is listening to all this. Pretty standard stuff so far, right? Well, just as things were chugging along, some new evidence came to light, and it took this case in a totally wild, personal direction that I guarantee you nobody saw coming. Get this, the HOA drops an absolute bombshell. And it came from the last person you'd ever expect, John Sellers' own wife, Deborah. Turns out they were going through a pretty nasty divorce, and she sent an email to both her husband and the HOA. And whoa, she did not hold back. She called the whole thing nonsense and accused him of freaking out potential buyers. I mean, can you imagine? That one email just blew his whole serious risk argument right out of the water.
So, after that piece of evidence came out, yeah, it's probably not a huge shock what happened next. The judge, Diane Maholsky, ruled against John Sellers. Case closed. Petition denied.
So why'd he lose? Well, it all came down to a question of proof. See, Sellers proved that, yes, there were plants and wire in the ditch. No one denied that. But what he didn't prove was that they were actually blocking the water, or creating what the law calls an unreasonable risk. From the judge's perspective, all the evidence showed the drainage system was actually working exactly as it was supposed to. Okay, so for most folks, that would be it, right? Game over. But not for John Sellers. He was not giving up. He decided to fight the ruling. And what happens next is something you almost never see in these kinds of cases.
Just a little over a month after losing, he files for a rehearing, basically asking for a do-over. And, get this, it was granted. A few weeks later, his request is approved. The case is back on. This is a huge deal.
So a new hearing gets put on the calendar for April. And this time, it's in front of a brand new judge, Tammy Eigener. This means a completely fresh start, a new set of eyes looking at all the facts.
All right, so for round 2, Sellers and his team switched up their strategy. This wasn't going to be about plants and rain videos anymore. No, this time it was all about a deep, fundamental legal question. What's the difference between having the right to do something and having an obligation to do it?
Here's the new argument in a nutshell. Sellers said, okay, sure, the HOA has the right to enforce the rules. We all agree on that. But, and this is the key part, he argued that when safety and property values are at stake, that right automatically becomes an obligation. The HOA doesn't just get to choose to act, they have to act. It's their duty. And this, right here, is the absolute heart of the entire legal battle. A right means you can do something. It's an option. An obligation means you must do something. It's a requirement. And for an HOA to have a legal obligation, that community rulebook, the CC&Rs, would have to have super specific language saying the HOA must do this. It couldn't just be implied.
So the new judge listened to this very clever new argument. She went back, she read the CC&Rs very carefully, and she made her final call. For the second and last time, the petition was dismissed. John Sellers lost again.
And here's the final breakdown of why he lost. The judge pointed directly to the text of the CC&Rs. One section said, plain as day, that individual homeowners are the ones responsible for keeping that area clear. Another section said the HOA has the right to enforce the rules. The judge's finding was simple. Nothing, absolutely nothing in that document used the word obligation or duty. The HOA could step in, sure, but it wasn't required to. At the end of the day, the rulebook put the responsibility squarely on the homeowners, not the HOA.
So after all that, a year-long fight, 2 judges, it all boils down to this one big question, and it's a question that affects millions of us who live in communities with HOAs. When it comes to something as important as safety, should an HOA's right to act automatically turn into an obligation to act? In this specific case, the law was clear. The answer was no. But it's definitely a conversation worth having in any community, don't you think?